Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced, and if you've been enjoying these videos, then well, like, subscribe, leave a comment, and make sure to follow me on LinkedIn and Twitter. But in today's video, what I'm going to do is just show you a little bit more about views, okay, the concept of views, and a Dremio semantic layer. Now, basically, we oftentimes don't need a full data set. We might need a subset of the data set, okay, and there's different ways you can achieve that. Typically, there's two concepts. There's a view, which is a logical view. So the idea is you're not making a copy of the data, but what you're doing is you're creating sort of like a name that is a shortcut to the SQL that creates that subset of the data. So you are running that query again every time you look at the data. Then there's a materialized view where you take that result, so that subset, and actually turn it into a separate copy of the data. Okay? Now, in Dremio, there are no materialized views because they have a feature called reflections, which honestly is better. Basically, a lot of the issues you would have with materialized views, as far as trying to keep them up to date, creating a whole bunch of additional names that you'd have to keep track of, you don't have to worry about with reflections. I'm not going to cover really reflections in this video. Later on, we will migrate to playing with Dremio Cloud, and I'll demonstrate it when we do that. But for now, what I want to do is just show you how you can create views in Dremio and how you can take advantage of a really cool feature in Dremio called the semantic layer. And the idea of the semantic layer is the ability to create a organized, logical way for people to kind of consume the data. Like it just makes sense to them. Okay, and generally the semantic layer generally operates through either folders or spaces, depending on which version of Dremio you're using. Okay, on Dremio Cloud, you'll mainly be focused on folders. Here in Dremio software, currently you're working with spaces, but they're effectively the same thing. They're just units of division, units of organization for organizing your data. So in this case, imagine that we're a school and I want to organize my data for different people. So we'll say, hey, I want to create a space for teachers. Okay, I want to create a space for students. And I want to create a space for administration. Okay, and the beauty of this is basically I can give access to the data they need. So let's pretend I have a table of students. So let's actually create that table. So I'm going to go over here. Okay, I'm going to set the context to my folder for today. So that's going to be inside Minio, December, actually folder 1224. There it is. Okay, and then from there, I'm going to run this script that I have for creating the students table. So this is going to create a table of student records. So it's just data on the students and basically information for each, about each student, who their homeroom teacher is, what their favorite topic is, their current score in the class, their current sort of grade. Again, this is just a general example, sample data, and their age. Okay, so in that case, what I can do is I can hit run. This will create the table. Okay. Oops, yep, I set the wrong context. Let me fix that again. 1224 is the context I want here. Okay, let's run that again. Cool. Okay, and that's creating all the students. Okie dokie. And there we go, we created the students. And I created 49 students. I thought I had 50, but 49. That's what happens when I don't count. Okay. But we got our students' data. So now I have my students' data that exists in my storage. So again, imagine that you are the data engineer who is the administrator of Dremio for this local school. Okay. Now what's going to happen is I can create users for the administration users, students, teachers, and they will see nothing. They don't see any of this until they are granted permission. Okay, so I can actually use SQL to grant them access. Maybe a topic for a different video. Okay, and actually I can just kind of show you what that would look like, docs.dremio.com. So if I were to go over here to the SQL reference, the docs are pretty well laid out. So if I go over here to SQL commands, you can find the grant. So I can either grant like a user, you can also have different roles, but let's say here I go to grant a user, I can grant a specific user privileges over particular assets. So in this case, if I wanted to give access to a user over a particular space, so let's say we enroll a new teacher, and that new teacher should have access to all the data sets in that teacher space that we created. Okay, I could just run a query like this. Okay, and I can grant them different levels of access. So I can say, hey, they're allowed to change data sets. They're allowed to query data sets. Okay, and all that details here in the documentation. I'm not going to quite cover that in detail right now. But essentially, this is kind of how Dremio Semantic Layer works. The idea is I'm going to curate the data that the right people will need, and then I can grant them access to that specific piece of the data. Okay, on top of that, there's also a built-in wiki. So generally, most objects here, which objects consist of spaces, folders, data sets, all get a little wiki entry, and I can go in there and I can edit this wiki and make it say different things. Okay, I'm not going to play with that quite yet, but I'm going to go to Minio. I'm going to go grab our student records, and what I may do is say, okay, well, the administration and the teachers should both get a raw copy of this data. Okay, like they can both take a look at all the data, because assuming there's nothing like sensitive in there. So I can, then what I can do is I can run the query, or I can, yeah, let's just run the query first. Okay, so there we query the data set. So there's all our data. And I am going to save it as a view in teachers, and we'll call this like raw student records. Okay, and then I might save that same view again for the administration. Who did I save it for? We'll say I think I did it for the teachers. Raw student records. Okay. Now for the students, I may not necessarily want them to be able to see what their current grade is. So in that case, I may create a different version of the data for them to access and just be like, okay, I want name, age, favorite class. And actually, I don't want them seeing each other's favorite classes, because then they'll be like, oh, I can't believe that's your favorite class. And they can see who their homeroom teacher is. That's the information we're going to make available to students. Okay, so I'll run that query. Okay, and see now I only have that data. And then I can save that view under students as raw record data for students. Cool. So now, again, if I'm someone who has access, and I see I save that same data set twice for administration, so I should, that's fine for now. Okay. This should have been under students. I accidentally chose administration, but the idea is like ideally that student's data set would have been here. If I grant the right permission to the right person, they're going to see the right data sets that are curated for them. Now, these views are not copies. These views are logical views. So they're SQL being run on top of the original data set, but they don't have direct access to the raw data set. They only have access to the views I give them access to. So as the data engineer, the wrong people don't have access to the wrong data if I set up my semantic layer correctly. Okay, that's the beauty of a semantic layer. And again, the beauty with Dremio in particular, where I can connect from several different sources of a data and organize it. Not just my data lake, but again, I can connect several different sources of data. Okay, and then I can access all those tables, create, and then distribute that to the right people using the views. Okay, and again, just so you know what the colors mean, whenever you see a purple data set, that is the actual raw physical data set, meaning the actual real copy of the data. While whenever you see a green data set, that is a logical view. So that means that is not a copy. Okay, now going forward, let's say I'm the teachers. Okay, and now each teacher is just generally going to maybe want their students. So I'm going to say, hey, I'm going to run the query so I can refer to the data. Okay, and I'm going to say, hey, you know what? I'm going to create one for Mr. Johnson. So I'm going to say, hey, where homeroom teacher equals Mr. Johnson. Okay, we'll run that query. Just make sure that I get just the Mr. Johnson students. There they are. Okay, and I can save that view as Mr. Johnson students. Okay. And now again, if I'm, where did I save that? I don't think I saved that anywhere in particular. Okay, I think I might have accidentally saved that as a script. So let me go back and do that again. Okay, run that, where homeroom teacher equals Mr. Johnson. Let me run that query. Okay, good. Let me save it as a view. Okay, under teachers, Mr. Johnson students. Okay, perfect. Okay, so now I'm Mr. Johnson, and I can go here and I can run this query, and I can see, okay, hey, these are the students whose homeroom I'm in charge of their homeroom. Maybe I want to kind of take a look at what their average score is. But see, I may only be granted data to this particular view. So in this case, I'm only seeing this information, even though technically it's running off the original data set. Okay, so again, I can now sit there and be like, okay, I like the, oops, Z, and then again, actually, if I go back to the main page, leave, just so you can see it from Mr. Johnson's point of view, if I clicked on teachers, then clicked on Mr. Johnson's students, notice he doesn't see the original query. Okay, there is a way to see that, but right now let's just focus on, hey, I'm Mr. Johnson. To me, this is just a table, a data set. I don't realize that this is really just a logical view of a much larger data set. And I can go here and drill down and say, hey, I'd like to know what the average, grade, say current score. Okay. Current score. Let me first I'm going to run the query on the data set. Yeah, it is current score. Okay. Average current score. Okay, I would like to know, hey, what's the average grade of my students? So I can sit there and run this query. Okay, and I can see, okay, running a 92. Or maybe I just want to, again, get the list of students because I want to do, build out an Excel dashboard for my student facing for the students. And I really just want to kind of get that CSV file real quick. So I can just go over here and download the CSV or Parquet or whatnot. But I can keep curating more and more views. Again, you can imagine a much larger data set that can be split up among many, many, many teachers. We can really organize that data. Okay, and that's the beauty of the semantic layer. Okay, so again, this was a very simple demonstration. But if you imagine, if you have lots of different data sources, okay, and really large data sets, we could really organize a lot of the data and just give it sort of one place where you can look at the data. And then again, we can document that. So now Mr. Johnson, if he wants to create notes, he can click on this pen. I can go over here to details. And then from the detail section, I can click here on edit wiki, and I can just be like, okay, Mr. Johnson's homeroom students. Okay, there is this and that. Put notes and documentation there about it, and that's going to be there to refer to. Okay, so we can see the data. We can find sort of information about the data. So I can see here like jobs that have been run on this query. I can see, hey, are there any views, okay, descendants that were created from this view? Okay, so this will show that. Let me go back to our raw student records. If I were to click, actually, now I want to go hit the pen so I can see all these detailed views. Okay, if I click here on details, I can see that there's two descendants of this view, meaning there's two views that were created from this view. Okay, and then again, you can pop this out to the side. Okay, and you can see when it was last updated. You can see when this view was created. You can see who was the creator of it or current owner of it. Okay, and we can also add little labels. So I can say, hey, this label is for Mr. Johnson. So I'll just tag it as Johnson. Okay, and you can tag it as many times as you want. And if you're using Dremio software, I can go over here. If I'm back on the main page, I can go over here and look for Johnson. Okay, and I can find the tags, the records that have been tagged Johnson to kind of understand that that's relative to Mr. Johnson. So I can also use tags to kind of help make it easier to find data sets. So the semantic layer, again, makes it just easier for people to curate and discover data. And that's one of the nice things about sort of Dremio being a lakehouse platform. One, again, when you're working with data stored in your data lake, the Apache Icebergs we worked across the last several videos, you have your data in a place that's portable, but also with the data lakehouse platform that federates multiple data sources, it becomes a funnel for all of your data. So hopefully you guys enjoyed that. There'll be more videos to come, but I think that might be the last one of these for the year. I'll see you after the new year. Have a great one. Enjoy.